Welcome back, everybody, to The Truth About Addiction. Today is a really special episode. I have been waiting for this interview for a long time. This is a sober girlfriend of mine named Amy Davis. She has been through it, and her story is extensive. So this is episode 1 of 2. Please listen to both. And without giving anything away, here's a little more information about Amy. Amy Davis is a sober, single mother and interior designer living in Los Angeles. After years in therapy and multiple 12-step programs, she is learning that speaking up about her sober experience diminishes its power over her and helps others. Amy is passionate about de-stigmatizing the topic of domestic abuse to bring awareness to how dangerous and sometimes deadly enablement is when it comes to both domestic and substance abuse. She is also learning that, quote, happily ever after, unquote, has nothing to do with what is on the outside, but everything to do with one's own character, honor, morality, ethics, self-love, self-respect, and self-forgiveness. Stay tuned. This is going to be a good one.
So tell me what you need, and tell me where you bleed, and I will listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Truth About Addiction. I am so excited about this conversation. I've been waiting for it for a really long time, waiting for my gorgeous friend across from me to be ready to speak her truth. And there's a whole lot she has to say. Amy has been a friend of mine in recovery for a very long time. And we just have this special bond we've talked about where, unlike so many other friendships, somehow we've been able to love and support each other through some of the worst times without it becoming a mess, without us having a falling out, without us blaming or shaming. And, more recently, we've had the hardest, most tragic thing happen to us in common in many ways. And so we're going to talk quite a bit about loss in recovery. But to get us started, Amy, whatever you want to share about your addiction journey and how you got brought into the rooms, that's where we're going to kick it off. And then we are going to fast forward quite a bit to some of the more recent tragedies that we've had to traverse and all the things that have come up and that continue to come up in living a sober life as we navigate grief. So no big deal. Here she is, everybody. Amy.
Thanks for having me. When you first started this podcast, I was like, I wonder if she's ever going to ask me. And I thought, it's interesting. I like that sobriety has become something that people are very open about now. And, you used to sort of hide the fact that you were sober, and the whole anonymity of it. But it's become such a massive problem in our society that I follow Instagram accounts that are about sobriety. I follow, I like that self-help gurus talk about their sobriety. Yep. It normalizes it. There are a lot of people who are sober. And there are a lot of people that need to be sober.
Amen, girl. Good Lord.
And so, yeah, and you're right. It took you did ask me to do this last summer, and I chose not to. I think at the advice of my family law attorney, because it's everything that you say can be something that is discussed, and everything that you write. So, I've been largely pretty quiet this last year, and we can get into that later, but you wanted me to talk about my journey into getting sober? Is that what you just?
Yeah.
So, like, I haven't had a drink in almost 13 years, and I haven't had anything, to be transparent, in 4.5 years. So that whole story, and I'm going to get into that, because there was a lot of shame with regard to starting my time over. So I now have a lot of empathy for those that, relapse. And I even have difficulty saying that word, relapse, because it feels so like, don't like saying that word. How does that pertain to my life? I basically, someone told me this once, and I thought it really explained how I felt. She said, "You are such a confident woman with really low self-esteem." And that's basically how I felt my whole life. Not so much now, because I've done so much work, but there was the feeling confident, knowing I should be confident, knowing I had all the things to be confident in my life, my talents, my abilities, and yet I had really low self-esteem. So I constantly felt like a fraud. And that type of insecurity would drive my drinking. So I wasn't a party animal in high school. I wanted to be, but my mother was really good about catching me. And I just thought, this is just not worth it. I would rather just go to San Diego State University from my tiny little Christian private high school and go to the biggest party school in California and live it up. And that's what I did. I drank a little bit. I smoked cigarettes. I was the cheerleader in the alleyway between two, a basketball game of JV and a varsity game. And I was back there with the other cheerleaders smoking cigarettes in the alleyway. That was that type of.
I remember those days.
Yeah. One time this cop came up and was like, "Hey kids, someone was murdered back here last weekend, so time to go back. Let's go." We were like, "Don't tell our parents. They're right across the street at the basket." I mean, I'm wearing a cheerleading uniform, and I'm like 15. So it was like doing those little type of rebellious things. I had a fine childhood. I don't have a lot of trauma to say from my childhood. It was, the little things like that I would find out later through a lot of therapy, that drove my insecurity. But those are stories that we learn. Like most of the beliefs that we have about ourselves are from things that have occurred when we were little kids. Our parents said something and we created a story about ourselves. We're not good enough. We're unlovable. It's not true, but we create those stories. And, I also had a lot of body image issues, oh, surprise, surprise. A female has body image issues when she's a teenager. And it started, but those started, I was late blooming compared to all my friends. So I was like flat chested. I was no curves. I was super skinny, freckled, teeth, hair that wasn't curly and not straight, so just sort of frizzy. I went through a real awkward stage between sixth grade and eighth grade. And and so it's those types of things that drove that insecurity. And then you fast forward to college, and when I started drinking, and I never drank normally. I wanted to drink, and I wanted to drink I never really blacked out. So then the next day I would have these horrible memories of what I had done, and the shame and the humiliation and the embarrassment. So even from, 18 years old, I knew that I shouldn't be drinking the way that I did. I put myself into really unsafe situations with men. I put myself in unsafe situations in general. What do people do who drink too much? They drive drunk. They don't hang out with people that have their best interests in mind. They get themselves into trouble. For females, I think we put ourselves in a lot of dangerous situations. Not I think, I know. And like, at what point do you recognize that it's the college experience and learning who you are, or you have the predisposition to be an alcoholic? And I know now that I always wanted, the moment wine, alcohol, weed, anything touches my lips, like, it's just peace for a bit. And then it's not. And I continued to just party hard, while also knowing that I wasn't living up to my potential. So I am creative. I had big dreams for my life, and I wasn't going after them. I chose not to move to New York when I was 22 years old, like my friend did, because I had a boyfriend and I stayed in LA to be close to him. Everything in my being told me that was not a good choice. And I still did it. And he's a wonderful person. I still speak to him. I was with him for 7.5 years, and in my 20s. And he's like I said, a great person. So it's not like it's not like I regret doing what I did, but there were situations that should have maybe been a different choice had I had self-esteem and security within myself. And I began to hate myself for the choices that I was making, which were choices that did not align with the dreams that I had for myself. So with that, I continued to feel more and more like a phony, more and more like a fraud, more and more like I had totally screwed myself. Like, you were supposed to be somebody. And I ended up moving to New York, which is a alcoholic's dream.
Sure is.
It just, from that point on, why would I ever go to sleep? Why would I not drink every single night of the week? And I really enjoyed New York City, and I also was filled with shame almost every morning. And like, my mediocre is a lot of my mediocre effort. And that's what I attribute when people are doing drugs and alcohol and things like that. They produce a mediocre or low output in their life, with their relationships, with their career, with everything. It's mediocre at best, but my mediocre is still pretty good. So I was able to sort of slide through, but I was always living paycheck to paycheck. And I knew that there was something up with when I would go on wake up the next morning and go through my bank account and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I just spent that much money. And I would feel the shame, feel hungover. And like, depression is, it's an interesting thing because I dealt with a little bit of depression as a kid. No one would have known that, but I now know that I had depression as a kid. I was hyper anxious about what people thought of me and desperately wanted people's approval and to like me and to love me and perform so I can get love and adoration and so that I can, oh, okay, I am worthy and I am good enough. And so that was a lot of anxiety with that as well. And then the depression with like feeling like garbage. So, you know, they went hand in hand. And when I did finally get sober, in 2011, after I moved back from New York City, and I was in a position where I didn't have anybody. I moved to the west side of Los Angeles and I did not know anybody. I had a breakup and I was alone. So I got into 12 steps and I had started participating in that. And I met a new group of people and I started to, really try to change my life. And one of the reasons why I came into the rooms is it's actually really interesting. I'd gone through this breakup. I had no money and I was 32 years old. And I called my father up and I asked him for some money to help me. And he was like, no. He said, I'm so disappointed in you. You were going to be somebody. And I was like, my dad had never said anything like that to me before. I knew he was frustrated with me at points, and when he said that to me, I walked into 12-step rooms 2 weeks later because I was like, you're right. I was going to be somebody. I'm going to have no shot at being anybody if I keep living a mediocre life. And mediocre is my version of hell. Is minimal output. Ugh, like, no thanks. Like that was, I like being busy. I like being on the run. I like talking to people. I like being busy from morning till night. That's my thing. And if I'm doing mediocre work, I feel like utter garbage, like a waste of life. And so I came into the rooms because I knew if I was ever going to be a mother, that there was no way I could drink. I knew that I would be a terrible mother if I was drinking. That's not normal thinking. People who don't have drinking problems don't think, if I am a mother, how am I going to drink? Like, how am I going to take care of a kid? Like, how, like, that's not normal. People don't think like that. If I am going to get married, how am I going to go through the day without having champagne and still look good in the pictures? Because I get a small eye. I have an ex-boyfriend who used to joke about it. I get a small eye and I get this weird like smile. So I'm going to look like $1 million on my wedding day. Granted, there was no man in sight, no potential child that was en route to me. But these are the things I was thinking about. Like how's I going to do that? And so those were the things. So I didn't lose anything in order for me to come in and get sober. I never really had anything. And because of that, I hated myself because I should have had things. I have a lot of talents. I'm a good person. I should have had these things. And so that's what brought me into the rooms. And by the rooms, I've just talked about 12-step rooms because that is, people say, oh, anonymity, but this is part of my story. So I'm not releasing anyone else's anonymity. It's my story. That's how I got sober. I wouldn't have been able to have done it any other way. And 7 years later, my marriage was absolutely falling apart in the most horrific way. And I wasn't going to meetings anymore. And I really was not telling my truth at all. I was very isolated. I hardly spoke to anybody anymore because I didn't know how to speak about what was going on behind closed doors. And so I smoked some pot, and then I came clean about it. And so that's when I restarted my time. So I haven't had any alcohol in almost 13 years. But I restarted my time to be in integrity with myself, integrity with my community. And so that would have been 2019 when I restarted my time. And then I find myself here. And what's surprisingly is getting sober gave me everything I ever wanted, but it also is where I have experienced the most horrific pain, trauma, horrors of my life. I've experienced the greatest joys and the deepest sorrows. And I'm not going to lie that in the last 14 months, since my ex-husband's death from a drug overdose, which was 1 month after our divorce was finalized, and it was a very, very nasty, high conflict divorce, unfortunately. And that there weren't points in the last 14 months, 15 months, however long it's been, that I haven't wanted to get effed up and not feel it. The pain was so, I mean, grief will annihilate you. And I never did, because that's not the answer. I know that it's not the answer. And so, but I will say there were moments where I was like, and it wasn't, I want alcohol. This was, I want a pill. I want it to be taken away. I do not want to feel this way at all.
So, okay, for the listener, on the front end of your story, Amy, I heard you say so many times that you lived with shame, and you also were in a regular practice, as we are as addicts and non-addicts, of turning away from your inner knowing. Okay. And if you couple that with maybe a hardwiring towards perfectionism and performing and addiction and depression and anxiety, you're going to accumulate a very large, dirty pile of shame that is going to cloud you having any real connection to your intuition. And then every time you betray yourself by not honoring what you feel deep down is the right thing for you, going to New York in your 20s versus staying with the boyfriend, any of those things, you're going to be able to feed the story internally that you're not worth loving because you're not honoring what you know is best for you. And so you have this huge pile of shame. And I relate so deeply to that moment that your dad was like, what's become of you? That was the same sort of feeling that I got from Rob when I went into the rooms, which was just a look of horror and disgust that exacerbated the shame that I already felt inside. And that's actually what got me in to recovery, though I really wasn't there emotionally. And
like my dad said, what I already thought about myself.
exactly.
I said
exactly
every day to myself,
yep.
Who are you? You were going to be somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Look at you.
Yep.
And my mom was already sober, so she already knew.
Mm.
She was just watching, like, oh my God, like just watching this situation. But yeah, like she'd been talking to me about getting sober for years, and I was like, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. The look in Rob's eye totally mirrored the shame I had inside about myself. Exactly. And then, this touch point that's so important, because I think even in 2023, people are confused about addiction, what it actually means, how it manifests, and why we can't stop when we want to, and why we still need recovery, all these years later. And as you said, as soon as you stop anesthetizing, you got all the things, quote unquote, you ever wanted, right? You got the marriage, and you had the baby, and the work and the integrity. And yet what comes with the decision to stop numbing out is everything that's on the other side of joy, everything that's on the other side of forgiveness, everything that's on the other side of deep stress, which means if we're going to invite in a sober life across the board, we're inviting in the possibility of resentment, of chaos and dysfunction, of friendship loss, of grief, of losing it all. And like you, there is nothing, and I've talked about this a lot on here, nothing that has taken me to my knees in recovery more than losing a loved one. It goes against my nature, which is to problem solve and to fix and to control and to create a neat and orderly world on the inside and the outside to the best of my ability. So I want to know if you're able to talk about it. You're married, you're seeing sort of behind the curtain now, whatever it was or whatever you thought it was when you got married versus what it became versus what it turned into at the end. And now you're face down. The worst thing imaginable has happened to you. He's now gone. The thing that we are promised as addicts, which is that if we keep using, what is left for us is jails, institutions, or death. Death being, of course, the most final, the most horrific. And so the worst of the worst of the worst has happened to you. And you have a child with this man. And that's what you've been doing. And that is what you've had to navigate sober, emotionally sober, and obviously physically for the last 14 months. So in whatever way you're willing to share, can you take me through the sort of rapid rise and fall of this life that you tried to build and all that you thought it was going to be, and the absolute and utter devastation of your hopes and your dreams, your child's future, your future, all of it, and where you are now with it? And we're going to get into it in whatever way you're comfortable.
Okay. It's taken a long time for me to be able to share this type of story. During my divorce, I developed a significant panic and anxiety disorder because I was really terrified of discussing it. and so I am a talker. I like to talk, and part of me talking, I'm like an idealist. I'm an Aquarian woman. I like to talk about this stuff. And I thankfully, behind the scenes, I've been able to talk about my story, and I have been able to help women who have been in situations like mine. And I'm grateful for that. But I'll get into that. But I was friends with my ex-husband, and I admired him because he had literally destroyed his life, and he had gotten sober and rebuilt it. And he was my friend, and we hung out, and we were both pretty early in our days of sobriety, a couple of years each. And he wasn't the normal type of person that I would date. I've always dated different kind of people, and I realized that I wanted someone with integrity. I wanted somebody to be with who was a good dad, and that I was recognizing my maturity, and that I didn't what I had been looking for was a little shallow, and that there was more. And I knew he had been pursuing me for about a year or 9 months, and I would never really felt that. And then my uncle died, and it really just put things into perspective. And it was New Year's Eve, and he'd been dating somebody, and I asked the universe, I said, bring me someone like him, and I named him. And then a few days later, we connected. He called me to tell me how sorry he was about my uncle's death, and we just started talking, and I realized that I was like sort of in love with him. And we developed a fast-paced relationship. And it's an interesting thing talking about someone who's died, because I don't want to come across as throwing the deceased under the bus, because they can't defend themselves. But at the same point, this is my story. I can't say my story without saying my experience. And so I just want to preface it with that. Like, who I am now would never have gone out with him, because I now know there was so many things he wasn't being honest about, and I can now see them like, oh yeah, that story that didn't make sense because it wasn't true. This story didn't make sense because it wasn't true. Oh, that was a red flag. This was a red flag. Oh my gosh. But like I said, I was confident, and I still had low self-esteem. It was growing, but my self-esteem wasn't there yet. And let me also say, I do not regret my relationship with him. I do not regret my marriage. Our marriage brought my child, our beautiful child, into this world. That was our purpose, is we brought an exceptional human being into this world who is creative and sensitive and emotional and open about her emotions. And she's athletic, and she lights up a room. She's got dimples like her father and big teeth like her dad does. And we talk about him. It doesn't change my reality, which was, we had a horrible marriage that was riddled with domestic violence, severe alcoholism and drug addiction. And I kept it quiet for 4.5 years. I did not say a word about it, really, to anyone except those that were very close to me. And they didn't even know really what was going on, because if I told them what was really going on, they would have made me leave. and I wasn't ready to leave. Now I've come to find out that's the cycle of abuse. And that is truly how people work through this. But when in relationships that are abusive, and in this particular case, it started to show its head in our engagement. There started to be some raging and name calling, and it was so jarring to me that I knew it was wrong, but I didn't want to believe what I now know was just the early signs of what would become a complete and utter unsafe horror show. And so I did what any woman who wants to get married, who's sort of insecure and hoping that what she knows is untrue and not real. And I got married. And our first year of marriage was horrific. And something happened. I had to go into the hospital of the fall of the fall right after we got married. And I realized that I was dealing with somebody who didn't quite think, that I was dealing with someone that didn't have empathy, but I didn't know how to maneuver that. And I had been told by a couple therapists up to that point that there was no hope for my marriage, that I needed to leave. And so I did what any person who doesn't want to leave their marriage did, and stop seeing them. So I did not see them anymore. And, I was just getting ready to actually leave my marriage, really consider it. I had 2 stepkids, and I really did not want to not have them in my life anymore. And I had been told if I left that I would never see or speak to them again. And that in and of itself is extremely abusive and coercive and terrible. But that was something that I did not want to miss out on. And as a result, I just continued to stay, and I got pregnant, and that's how that happened. I was considering leaving. And so I got pregnant, and I was like, okay, well, you're not going to leave. So here we go. And, I put on a show. I put on a really good show. And people have asked me, Amy, why did you make your social media? Why was your social media showcasing what a beautiful marriage you had? And I really had to take a look at that and figure that out, because on the outside, I put the show on that we had a great marriage, and we did have fun on our vacations. I would plan these really fun adventure vacations. That was something that he and I really enjoyed. And that's still something I love about, when I get together with another person, I very much want them to maintain this same type of thing that I had never had before, which was outdoorsy people. We like to hike. We like nature. We got engaged in Yosemite. I introduced him to Yosemite. He would do these fun things. We went to Yellowstone, and when we would Big Sky, that was our thing, adventure. And our life was usually pretty damn good when we were on vacation doing these adventurous things. But, marriage is not without difficulty. And we could never even work through any of our issues with marriage, which was mainly communication and me wanting to be heard and acknowledged. And so to get back to the social media, and why I bring that up is because when it started to get really bad, people just, okay, let me go back. I painted the picture that our life was great. And I wasn't telling people it really wasn't. My parents knew. They had known what was going on, but they did not know the extent of it. They didn't know there was physical violence in our home. They did know that he would relapse and he would disappear for weeks at a time. That he would be incapacitated, that I would have to flee with my daughter and go other places. Like, this was going on every few months. It was utter and complete insanity. I had no access to our money. So that was something that really came out. Like, I didn't know that financial abuse was part of domestic violence. I didn't know anything about this. I had the mentality that domestic violence, which is often perpetrated by people with addiction, it usually go hand in hand. Now, just because you're an addict or an alcoholic does not mean you are a perpetrator of violence. However, most perpetrators of violence are addicts. So you're cut from a little bit of a different cloth here. And so I put up this facade that everything was great. Everything was fine. He just had an addiction. I didn't want people to know the extent of what was going on. Our neighbors knew. They would hear the yelling and the screaming at me. Our neighbors would see it, and I had like this whole thing that I would do, which was on the third day of his bender, because I had no money. It's how could you not have any money? Well, because I was working full time, I was making a 6-figure income, and my money would immediately go into his account because he was the financial planner. He had done that in his previous life, so he knew better. I had no reason to think that any funny business was going on. And so because I didn't have any money, my concern was if I left prior to him being completely incoherent, he would turn off my American Express and I would be without money. Then I would have to flee to my parents, and then they would know what's going on. So I often kept it a total secret because I didn't want people to know what was happening. But I couldn't get the money and I so that I could live a normal life or protect our child. And again, this story is so insane and it's so wildly detailed that you just fast forward here a bit and it started to become like I couldn't trust him with our daughter. He would leave the house when he would get home. I knew he was drinking, but I couldn't find the booze. I knew he was high on drugs, but I couldn't find them. Like I always talk about how the wife of an addict is the most intuitive, nut around. They can say one thing, maybe roll their R, one word that no one else would know. And you'll be like, boom, he's drunk and he's high. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Everything is going to implode. And so when I did finally leave the first time, which would be 2019, I had been speaking to my my psychiatrist who was prescribing me antidepressants. I was deeply depressed about where my life was completely falling apart. I did not know who to be, how to be, anything. And I informed her that for the last 2 months, I had been, I don't know any other way to say it, but physically assaulted. I had been thrown into furniture. I'd been thrown into a wall. I had bruises on my body. I had to call the cops 2 days later. And, I was sobbing hysterically. I don't know what to do. I didn't know that would trigger a call to the Department of Child and Family Services here in Los Angeles. Because even though my daughter didn't see it, she was in the house and she was sleeping. It was the middle of the night, a couple of different times. And so that then triggered a call with the Department of Child and Family Services, which then triggered me needing to get a restraining order and me needing to protect me and my child. And that was the first of 2 restraining orders. And, I'll never forget, I sat there in my attorney's office And she said to me, like, you have to get a restraining order. And I said, no, I don't need a restraining order. Like, this is fine. She's like, no, you have to, in order to keep him from coming into your home when he is drunk. You cannot protect yourself unless you have a restraining order, and you cannot protect your child because he has a right to see his child. And so you have to show the court that he can't. And so that's when I first got honest. That's where I walked into an Al-Anon meeting and said, it was my first day going, I haven't been telling the truth. I just got a restraining order against my husband. My marriage is horrific. It's abusive. It's awful. He is on a run. He is dying. And I don't know what to do. And I'm falling apart here. And now the very thing, which is me being the best mother I can be, me being everything I can to protect my child, is now coming into question because I have stayed with her father. It wasn't that I was somehow putting my child in an abusing the situation. It was that because I stayed with her father, that was the question. Was my need to be with her dad more important than her actual safety and life? That's where those things come into play. And I had to sit there, and she was like, you are in a domestically violent relationship. And I was like, it's not possible. I am an educated woman. I am smart. I have, I have this life. I'm a sober woman. How am I I'm not being abused, because to me, the idea of a woman staying in an abusive relationship was the most shameful thing. And I sat there, tears streaming down my face, and she went through the whole list of what constitutes a domestically violent relationship. And I checked off every single one but one. And that was that. And
can I ask you something really difficult? When you're sitting here thinking about all this and who you were through that time, and by the way, I'm glad you're bringing up some of the hell that, forget about internally, you went through in that house behind closed doors when your daughter was asleep. Okay. But externally too, people questioning you. And this happens so much now, particularly with the social media platforms and the world we live in, where you can just be lambasted. There's no compassion. There's no empathy. There's just hostility and judgment. And easy for people to do, how could you post? Well, I don't get it. You posted such a happy life, right? So one-dimensional. And so I'm glad you're talking about the type of external ridicule, because we're talking about, some level of denial, a lot of survival that you were in. Okay. That social media, for 99.9999% of the public, is truly a place where we put mostly good things. And it's part of what's so toxic about it. Okay. So let's just be fucking honest about that for a second. That people aren't talking about and posting pictures of their face without makeup, of their heart when it's broken, of their partner who cheated on them. Okay. So you're dealing with external ridicule, deep emotional and physical abuse inside of the house, and self-ridicule for staying, right? And betraying yourself again, much like you described when you were using, that self-betrayal. And I'm wondering, when you look back right now, sitting here talking about this, and you think about, not that long ago, that woman who maybe in hindsight saw that there were red flags and, signs of his rage that and I did the same thing. I mean, gosh, the way I overlooked, so many signs and turned away from my inner knowing while I was sober in my own marriage. I have an understanding about who I was and what led to those things now, right? So when you think back to that version of yourself where you just sort of kept getting in so deep, what do you think emotionally captures or describes where you were in order for you to bypass that inner knowing of like, gosh, I'm in danger. This could really turn out the worst, sitting from the seat you're in now, which is that it did end up the worst way, right? What do you think was the things emotionally that were allowing you to continue to betray that inner knowing so that you stayed? And by the way, let's be very fucking clear. This is about trying to get deeply honest and aware of who we are at different stages in our lives and how we can transform, not at all to blame, to shame, to point the finger, because my story contextually is different, but emotionally completely the same, as far as, tolerating these things that are so deeply harmful. And really to the body, it feeling quite normal and justifiable for so much longer than it quote unquote should, as full-blown adults. And I'm only now, scratching the surface in a way that is still new in terms of touching on the level of trauma in my childhood and all the coping mechanisms I still default to with almost 15 years sober that aren't good for me as an adult. So I just want to know, like, what comes up when I ask you that?
There's two things that you brought up. Why would I put on the facade that it was great? And that our relationship was great. I mean, I had people say that they were modeling, that they were jealous of my relationship. And with that, all I can say, because I wasn't saying that my ex-husband went on a run. I wasn't saying that we were, that I called the cops the night before. I wasn't saying that there were things like that going on. There's two things, or maybe three. One, I would post those things on social media, not to get adoration, because I really don't necessarily care about that. I don't want people to think I have some great life. That's honest about stuff in our social media, things about myself, postpartum depression. I'm an honest person. That's just who I am. I'm an open book. Now I know that my open book has, there could be legal ramifications with regard to it when you are dealing with litigious people that want to silence the truth. So I do have to be aware of that. But back then it was like, oh my gosh, today he's being so nice to me. Today we had a great day as a family. 2 days ago, I thought we weren't going to make it and I was going to have to run for my life. Or 1 month ago, he was in yet another detox after he went running and, assaulted me and said terrible things to me, whatever. But today we're doing well. So maybe today's the day. I'm going to commemorate this. I'm going to put it on social media. Look how happy we are. To trick myself.
Yep.
I desperately wanted my marriage to work out. I wanted my family to work out. I wanted him to be sober. I knew he would die. His addiction is horrific, like none I've ever seen. So I went to save his life multiple times. enrolled other people to come into our chaotic world of hell to help save his life. Because I had a baby, I now had to protect her. And the idea that I couldn't save him, the idea that I wasn't worthy of having a good marriage, or that there was no hope for our marriage, there was no hope for our love, that my love couldn't save him, therefore he must not love me, was too painful to acknowledge. And that is also, I talk about domestic violence a lot because I do think that I didn't know I was in a domestically violent relationship. I didn't know it till I was told. I knew there was something massively messed up about what was going on, but I didn't know the extent of it. I knew that his enablement from his friends and family was beyond anything I had ever witnessed. And it was too much for me to comprehend. I couldn't understand. So the DV part of it does play a part, because there is apparently it takes a long time for someone to get the courage to leave. And the other part of why I stayed is the very serious and very real part of family law. I knew I could not protect my child in family law court without evidence of horrific behavior. That's just the fact. So it had to get as bad as this is why a lot of women stay. I mean, this is just across the board. You can look into any information about DV, why women stay. So, well, what if it was so bad? Why'd you stay? Number one, a lot of women don't have money to leave. Number two, they know it's going to be a battle in family law. Number three, they have to have evidence. And a lot of us don't compile evidence because, one, what if they find out that you're compiling evidence? Which is why I was constantly getting my phone taken away when I would try to record or videotape or take pictures and things like that. You know, and so that is why I also, it sounds messed up because how could you love someone who treated you so badly? I did love him. Who he was is not who I married. I didn't marry that guy. He had the potential to be who he was. I definitely think, and this is how I've had to just make it up to give myself a little bit of healing. I desperately think that he very much wanted to be a good man, a good husband, a good father. I think he wanted to be it. When he was sober, I think he knew that's what he should want. He knew he should be that. But there was another part of him that didn't want that. He asked me to marry him because I'm the bomb. I'm nice. I'm funny. I'm a good mom. I'm smart. I'm a hard worker. I was a good wife. I'm good at a lot of other things. Like I was insecure. Sure, I had some little issues I needed to deal with. But overall, I'm a damn good woman. And he knew that, which is why he married me. And then we've got this great child. And, so no one wants to break up their family. Anyone who's like, oh, this family just needs to end. At what point are you going to call it? When are you going to call it throw in the towel that you guys just aren't a match? That's not it. This isn't about us being a match. We were a match at one point. Whether or not it would have continued to be had he not started using. But that's where it gets that's where, like I said earlier, who I am now would have known and seen the red flags with him. And it would have been a very short relationship, if anything at all. I'm grateful it wasn't. I'm grateful I was insecure. I'm grateful that I didn't have enough knowledge, wherewithal to make that decision. I think yeah, I know we're running out of time. I don't know.
What I love so much about having these conversations is the chance that we get to tell a fuller story. Because I think part of where we've really lost as a society our ability to connect with one another is that everything is fragmented through social media. We get these little bursts of input. And the way you just answered that question, and if we took our entire conversation into account, is rich with a laundry list of answers and quote unquote explanations for why you got into the relationship, who you were on the front end of it, all the things that were going on behind closed doors, the psychological depths and despair that happens with domestic violence, the reality that in recovery, another reason, as an addict, we try to stay sober and quote unquote peel back the layers of the onion is because what happened in the marriage is you hit a codependency bottom. You now know that yes, you put drugs and alcohol down. Good for you. But all of a sudden, you're trying to exert power and control over the way the marriage looks, the way your husband's behaving. And that's its own. I have that same thing. I have hit a bottom where I got into Al-Anon. I've hit a recent bottom where I'm in ACA because there's more ways, and they're deeply insidious, that my addiction, my desire to not feel my feelings, to go outside of myself, to have a controlled and orderly world show up. And without hearing all of this nuance, how can we have compassion for each other? All we are left with is judgment, ridicule, and disconnection. And I just want to honor what you've been through. I want to honor the deep, unrelenting work you have been doing and continue to do on yourself, the level of self-awareness, the level of personal accountability, the level of recovery of shame and recovery of self that you are doing, the level of courage for single parenting, for surviving all of this, for coming on here and talking about it. When you felt ready. Well, clearly this is going to be a part one and a part two. So, you guys, we set aside an hour for this conversation when really, how on earth can you talk about any of this in an hour? You can't. We've gotten quite a ways forward, and in an effort not to shut this down because there's so much more to say, we're just going to have a second one.
Okay.
So
oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? I can't leave it right there. I didn't talk about the good stuff, and I absolutely.
And you know what though? You did though. We're going to get into it because you and I have a lot to say about what's on the other side of betrayal, heartbreak, and grief. We have a lot to say about that, and people need to fucking hear that.
And love.
And
Like,
love and love and love. There's so much hope, and we will, but I want you to know that
I'm glad you said that. So much hope. Yeah.
there was so much of that in this last hour that you
Really?
heard. Yes, there was. Yes, there was. For people who are paying attention. Yes, there was. First of all, the level at which you can self-reflect and speak about this, the seat that you're sitting in 14 months after he died, raising this daughter you had with him by yourself, is already a fucking testament to what is possible when you hang on to hope in the face of a living nightmare. Okay. Period. End of story. So what we're going to do is return to this. You and I will pick a day, hopefully in the next week or so. So there's some continuity.
Yeah.
And we will have a part 2. And for everyone listening, you can take a deep breath now. And I hope you really, really hear what we're saying. And it might be something you need to revisit again and again. It's one of those conversations where you're going to probably hear things very differently depending on where you are in your life, in your recovery of your own capital S self, in your recovery of your own judgment, and in your desire to connect with another human being in the way that we all desperately need. So stay tuned for part 2. Amy, I love you so much. And I'm so looking forward to the next half of this conversation.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh my God, it's such a joy. I love you.
And there is hope. There is hope.
There is hope.
I wanna help you, but I don't know how. I wanna guide you, but I can't figure it out. So tell me what you need, and tell me where you bleed, and I will listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you. You seem so stuck there, holding on to some old story, still going strong. So tell me what you did, and tell me how you lived, and I will listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you. Where can you go now? Can I keep you from falling down? If you just keep floating, you won't drown. There's a knowing that can be found if you listen. Can you listen? Oh, I will listen to you. There's a voice deep inside you that will be there to guide you. So tell me, what do you hear? Can you quiet your worst fear? If you listen, can you listen? Oh, I will listen to you. Where can you go now? Can I keep you from falling down? If you just keep floating, you won't drown. There's a knowing that can be found listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you.